Welcome to this journey through one of the most chilling tales of revenge in Prohibition-era America. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will shake your understanding of justice, vengeance, and the terrible price of collective guilt in a way few other accounts can. We're about to delve into a mystery that consumed an entire town in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, where one man's quest for retribution defied all expectations of human endurance and left a legacy so blood-soaked that for decades, survivors refused to speak his name aloud. A tale where the line between victim and monster blurred until it disappeared entirely, where an entire community paid for sins they believed they'd buried in the dark earth of a forgotten hollow. It was the year 1928. The Volstead Act had been the law of the land for nearly a decade, transforming ordinary citizens into criminals and creating criminal empires overnight. In New York, Al Capone's brutal reign was reaching its zenith. In Chicago, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre was just months away. But in the isolated mountains of Harlan County, Kentucky, Prohibition had created something far more intimate, far more personal, and infinitely more terrifying than organized crime. Here, in these ancient Appalachian peaks where coal dust mixed with morning mist and moonshine stills bubbled in hidden caves, the federal government's war on alcohol had become a war on a way of life. Bootlegging wasn't just business. It was survival. It was tradition. It was the only economy many families had ever known. And when that economy turned deadly, when a community decided that one life was worth less than their collective prosperity, they had no way of knowing that their victim would return from the grave itself to collect a debt written in blood. This is the story of Elijah Moss, the bootlegger who couldn't die, and the town of Thornwood that learned too late that some debts can never be paid. The town of Thornwood existed as more of a suggestion than an actual place on any map that mattered. Nestled in a valley so narrow that sunlight touched the main street for only 4 hours each day, it consisted of perhaps 200 souls spread across a collection of weathered clapboard structures that seemed to grow organically from the mountain itself. The SLAVES, who WORKED, for those buildings families who MENT into ONED, them to their each EMPLOYER, or other like old men sharing secrets, their gray wood surfaces streaked with coal dust and darkened by decades of wood smoke. To reach Thornwood, you followed a road that was generous in name only, a rutted, serpentine path that clung to cliffsides with the desperation of a drowning man clutching at roots. During winter, this road became impassable for months at a time, sealing the valley from the outside world as effectively as any prison wall. During spring, avalanches of mud and stone would reshape the route entirely, forcing travelers to navigate by instinct and prayer rather than any reliable landmarks. The mountains here were old, some of the oldest on Earth. The Cherokee who'd once called this land home had spoken of these peaks with reverence and fear, claiming that spirits dwelt in the deepest hollows, that certain caves should never be entered, that some silences should never be broken. When European settlers pushed into these valleys in the 1700s, they brought their own superstitions, their own ghosts, their own reasons for disappearing into places where questions died before they could be asked. By 1928, the population of Thornwood consisted primarily of 3 extended families: the Harpers, the Caldwells, and the Bishops, whose bloodlines had intertwined over generations, until nearly everyone in town could claim kinship of some kind. They worked the few remaining coal seams that hadn't played out. They hunted the sparse game that managed to survive in these exhausted forests. They grew what meager crops the rocky soil would permit. But mostly, they made whiskey. The limestone caves that honeycombed the mountains provided perfect conditions for aging moonshine. The cold mountain streams offered pure water untainted by industrial runoff. The isolated location meant that revenue agents were spotted miles away, their approach announced by a network of lookouts who could signal danger with mirror flashes visible from peak to peak. For generations, these families had perfected their craft, producing corn whiskey so smooth and potent that buyers from as far as Cincinnati and Louisville would travel treacherous roads to acquire it. Prohibition hadn't created this industry. It had merely made it extraordinarily profitable. Every family in Thornwood contributed to the enterprise in some way. Women tended the corn crops that would be fermented into mash. Children served as runners, carrying messages between stills. Old men maintained the trails and watched for outsiders. It was a communal effort, one that bound the town together with shared prosperity and shared risk. At the center of this web sat Jacob Harper, a man whose grandfather had founded Thornwood and whose word carried the weight of law in this isolated valley. Harper was 50, 3 years old in 1928, a man whose face seemed carved from the same limestone as the surrounding cliffs, hard, weathered, marked by deep lines that shadow pooled in. He wore a perpetual expression of grim calculation, weighing risks and rewards with a merchant's precision and enforcing his decisions with a coal miner's ruthlessness. Harper controlled the largest still operation in the county, a sprawling complex of copper kettles and aging barrels hidden deep in a cave system known locally as the Devil's Throat. He employed 24 men directly and controlled the distribution network that moved product to buyers across 3 states. In an economy where a coal miner might earn $3 for a brutal day's work, Harper's operation generated thousands of dollars weekly. He was, by any measure that mattered in Thornwood, the most powerful man in the valley, and Elijah Moss was about to become his greatest problem. Elijah had arrived in Thornwood in the autumn of 1926, appearing one morning like mist, condensing into human form. Nobody knew exactly where he'd come from, though rumors suggested he'd fled Tennessee after a dispute that ended badly. He was 28 years old, lean and weathered, with eyes the color of slate and hands that bore the scars of a hard life. He spoke little, smiled less, and possessed a quality of stillness that made people uncomfortable, the kind of stillness that predators exhibit when deciding whether to attack or to wait. But Elijah knew whiskey. Within weeks of his arrival, he demonstrated an almost supernatural understanding of fermentation, of temperatures and timing, of the precise moment when a batch was ready. The moonshine he produced was exceptional even by Thornwood's exacting standards, smooth as silk, strong enough to strip paint, with a subtle complexity that betrayed sophisticated technique. Jacob Harper, recognizing talent when he saw it, had hired Elijah to oversee production at the Devil's Throat. For 18 months, this arrangement worked. Elijah lived in a small cabin on Harper's property, kept to himself, and produced whiskey that commanded premium prices. Then Elijah made the mistake of falling in love. Sarah Harper was Jacob's only daughter, 22 years old, with her father's calculating mind housed in a delicate frame that concealed surprising strength. She'd been educated at a boarding school in Lexington, one of the few advantages her father's illegal wealth had provided, and she chafed at the limitations of life in Thornwood. She read voraciously, corresponded with friends in distant cities, and nursed dreams of a life beyond these suffocating mountains. When she and Elijah began meeting in secret, it wasn't the scandalous romance of forbidden passion. It was something quieter, more profound. They recognized in each other a similar displacement, a shared sense of not quite belonging to the world they inhabited. In the stolen hours they spent together walking the mountain trails, sharing books by lamplight, talking about futures that seemed impossibly distant. They constructed a fragile bridge between two kinds of loneliness. They were careful. They understood that Jacob Harper would never approve of his educated daughter marrying a hired hand with a mysterious past. They planned to save enough money to leave Thornwood together, to start fresh somewhere the mountains couldn't hold them. But in a town of 200 souls where everyone was someone's cousin, secrets have a very short half-life. In March of 1928, Jacob Harper learned about his daughter's relationship with Elijah Moss. What happened next would be disputed in later years, when survivors finally began to speak. Some claimed Harper flew into a rage, that he struck Sarah across the face, that he locked her in her room and posted guards at her window. Others insisted it was more calculated, that Harper simply explained reality to his daughter with brutal clarity. Elijah Moss was nobody, nothing, a drifter who would abandon her as soon as circumstances required it. But everyone agreed on what Harper said to Elijah. "You have until sundown to be gone from this valley. If I see you after dark, I'll kill you myself." Elijah Moss did not leave. Perhaps it was love that kept him. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was the simple, stubborn refusal to be ordered around by a man he'd come to despise. Whatever his reasons, when darkness fell on that March evening, Elijah was still in Thornwood, standing outside Sarah Harper's window, calling her name softly into the night. He never saw the men who grabbed him. They came from behind, 6 of them, faces covered with burlap sacks cut with eye holes. They moved with the efficiency of men who'd done similar work before, one arm pinned, then the other, a rope looped around his neck before he could shout, a wet cloth pressed over his face until the world dissolved into chemical darkness. When Elijah regained consciousness, he was in absolute blackness. The cold was the first thing he noticed. It crept through his clothes, settled into his bones, made his joints ache with a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with air temperature. The second thing was the smell. Wet limestone, old earth, the faint mineral tang of water that had filtered through rock for 10,000 years. He was in a cave. His hands were bound behind his back with rough hemp rope. His ankles were similarly tied. When he tried to move, pain exploded through his ribs. At least 2 were broken, probably from the beating he couldn't remember receiving. His face felt swollen, one eye nearly closed, and when he probed his mouth with his tongue, he found gaps where teeth had been. "Hello?" His voice echoed strangely, absorbed by the darkness rather than reflected. "Is anyone there?" Nothing. He tried to orient himself. The stone beneath him was smooth, shaped by ancient water into gentle curves. The air was perfectly still, no breeze, no circulation, which suggested he was deep underground, far from any entrance. When he breathed, he could hear the sound magnified, bouncing off unseen walls. Terror crept into his chest like ice water filling a sinking ship. He'd worked in these caves. He knew their depths, their complexity, their absolute indifference to human life. The devil's throat alone extended for miles underground, branching into passages that connected to other cave systems, creating a labyrinth where a man could wander for weeks without seeing daylight. People had died in these caves, lost miners, foolish explorers, children who'd wandered too far from safety. Their bones were still down here, somewhere in the darkness. Elijah forced himself to think rationally. Harper wanted him gone, wanted him scared enough to never return. This was a message, brutal but temporary. They'd beaten him, dumped him in a cave to terrify him, but they'd come back. They had to come back. Didn't they? Hours passed. He couldn't see his hands in front of his face. The darkness was absolute, oppressive, a physical weight that pressed against his eyeballs. He tried to sleep, but found he couldn't. The cold wouldn't let him. and the fear that he might slip into unconsciousness and never wake kept him rigidly alert. He listened. In the perfect silence, he could hear things he'd never noticed before. The slow drip of water from distant stalactites, each drop arriving with metronomic precision. The subtle shift of air as temperature differences created microscopic currents. The sound of his own heartbeat, amplified by the stone until it seemed to fill the cave like distant thunder. And beneath it all, something else, a sound so faint he might have imagined it. A whisper, or maybe the movement of something that shouldn't be moving, the suggestion of presence in empty space. The Cherokee had been right. There were things in these caves that didn't belong to the world of sunlight. Time became meaningless. Without any reference point, hours could have been days, days could have been hours. Thirst became Elijah's primary concern. His throat felt like sandpaper, his tongue swollen and clumsy. He could hear water dripping, tantalizingly close, but bound as he was, he couldn't reach it. Then he heard voices. They came from above, or perhaps from one side. The acoustic properties of the cave made direction impossible to determine. Muffled at first, then clearer. Men talking in low tones, their words echoing through stone passages until they reached Elijah's prison. Shouldn't have hit him so hard. Harper said, make sure he understands. Christ, how long's he been down there? Relief flooded through Elijah so powerfully that tears stung his damaged eyes. They were coming back. Whatever message Harper wanted delivered, it was over now. They'd pull him out, dump him on the road out of town, and this nightmare would end. The voices grew fainter. They were leaving. Wait. Elijah screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. I'm here, don't leave me. The echo of his own voice mocked him, bouncing endlessly through the cave system. Here, 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 leave me, then silence, complete, absolute, suffocating silence. They were gone, and in that moment, Elijah Moss understood with terrible clarity that Jacob Harper hadn't meant to scare him. Harper had meant to kill him, had already killed him, really. The rest was just a slow process of dying, alone in the dark, while the mountain digested another soul. But Elijah Moss was not done living. Working his wrists against the rope, ignoring the way it cut into his skin, feeling warm blood make his hands slippery, he twisted and pulled with maniacal desperation. The hemp was thick, well tied, but whoever had bound him hadn't accounted for blood as lubricant. For hours, maybe days, he worked at those bonds, his broken ribs screaming with every movement, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rope gave, his hands were free. In the darkness, he felt for the knots at his ankles, his numb fingers fumbling over wet stone until he found them. These came loose more easily. He stood, swayed, nearly fell as vertigo overwhelmed him, then steadied himself against the cave wall. He was free of his bonds, but he was still in absolute darkness, hundreds of feet below the surface, in a cave system vast enough to swallow armies. Most men would have panicked, would have run blindly through the dark until they fell down a shaft or drowned in an underground stream, or simply exhausted themselves and died. But Elijah Moss had spent 18 months working in these caves. He'd mapped much of the Devil's Throat system, memorized landmarks, learned to navigate by touch and sound. And he'd seen something that Jacob Harper didn't know about. A secondary entrance, narrow and treacherous, but leading to the surface. It was in a section of the cave they rarely used, accessible only by crawling through passages barely wide enough for a man's shoulders. Elijah began to move through the darkness. He kept one hand on the wall, feeling the texture of the stone, searching for the subtle variations that would tell him where he was. Here, the limestone was smooth, polished by ancient waters. There, it was rough, almost crystalline. His fingers traced cracks, measured the height of the ceiling by raising his free hand until it touched stone, counted paces between turns. He had no idea how long he'd been unconscious. Days, certainly, maybe a week. His body was consuming itself. He could feel the weakness in his muscles, the light-headed dizziness of advanced dehydration. But fear and rage kept him moving, one careful step after another, navigating by memory and touch through a darkness that would have driven most men insane. He found water, an underground stream, ice, cold and clear, and he drank until his stomach cramped, then drank more. The water revived him enough to continue. He found the narrow passage he remembered. Barely 2 feet high, it extended for what he recalled as perhaps 50 yards before widening into a natural chimney that led upward. He got down on his belly and began to crawl, ignoring the way the stone scraped his back, the way his broken ribs ground against each other with every breath. The passage narrowed further. For a terrifying moment, he thought he was stuck, wedged between floor and ceiling with no way forward or back. But he exhaled completely, made himself as small as possible, and pulled himself forward with his fingertips, inch by agonizing inch. Then the passage opened. He found himself in the chimney, a vertical shaft with just enough handholds to be climbable. In complete darkness, relying entirely on touch, he began to climb 20 feet, 40, 60. His muscles screamed. His hands bled. Several times he nearly fell, catching himself at the last second, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Then he saw it, light, not much, just a faint gray glow from far above, barely distinguishable from the darkness. But it was light, daylight, the surface, freedom. Elijah climbed with renewed strength, pulling himself up through the narrowing chimney until finally, he emerged into a vertical crack in the mountainside, barely wide enough to squeeze through. He pulled himself onto the mountain slope and lay there, gasping, bleeding, more dead than alive. But alive, the sun was setting. He'd been underground for 5 days. The hermit who found Elijah probably saved his life, though in later years, some would question whether that was a kindness or a curse. Old Ben Craddock lived alone in a shack 7 miles from Thornwood, subsisting on game he trapped and vegetables he coaxed from a small garden. He'd been a coal miner once, before an accident left him with a mangled leg and a permanent distrust of enclosed spaces. He ventured into town perhaps twice a year to trade furs for supplies, and otherwise preferred the company of mountains to that of men. He found Elijah collapsed near a creek, more corpse than living man, and carried him back to his shack over one shoulder like a deer carcass. For 3 weeks, Craddock nursed Elijah back to something resembling health, feeding him venison broth and wild herbs, setting his ribs as best he could, cleaning infected wounds with whiskey and prayers. During those weeks, as fever raged and hallucinations danced at the edges of consciousness, Elijah Moss changed. The man who'd fallen in love with Sarah Harper, who'd dreamed of escape and new beginnings, died in that cave. What emerged was something harder, colder, more patient. A man who'd looked into absolute darkness and found that it looked back with interest. A man who'd been murdered and refused to accept it. A man with a very specific purpose. When Elijah could walk again, he thanked old Ben Craddock and set out into the mountains. But he didn't leave Harlan County. Instead, he disappeared into the high country, into territory so remote that even hunters rarely ventured there. He built a shelter in a cave mouth overlooking the valley where thornwood sat like a collection of mold growing on stone. And he began to plan. Elijah knew things about Thornwood's bootlegging operation that Jacob Harper had foolishly trusted him with. He knew the locations of every still, every cache, every distribution route. He knew which lawmen were paid to look the other way and which ones were honest enough to be dangerous. He knew schedules, routes, contacts, prices. He knew everything. And he intended to use that knowledge to dismantle Jacob Harper's empire, piece by piece, until the man who'd tried to bury him alive understood what it meant to lose everything. The first still exploded on a moonless night in late May. It wasn't the main operation in the Devil's Throat, but a smaller satellite facility operated by the Caldwell family, one of Harper's primary suppliers. The explosion thermite paste packed into copper kettles, ignited by a delayed fuse, could be heard for miles, a thunderous boom that rattled windows in Thornwood and sent birds fleeing from trees. When the Caldwells reached the site, they found nothing but twisted metal and scorched earth. Months of work, thousands of dollars in equipment, gone. The fire had been so hot that the copper had melted, pooling on the cave floor like frozen silver tears. Written in charcoal on the cave wall was a single word, Moss. Panic rippled through Thornwood. Elijah Moss was supposed to be dead, buried in the Devil's Throat, his bones scattered by underground streams. The men who dumped him there, Bishop cousins, 4 of them had been paid well for their silence. They'd sworn he was secured, that there was no way he could escape. But apparently they'd been wrong. Jacob Harper called a town meeting in the church, the only building in Thornwood large enough to hold everyone. Standing at the pulpit, his face grave, he addressed the assembled families. "Elijah Moss is alive," he said, his voice carrying to the back pews. "He's destroyed the Caldwells still, cost us considerable money, and made his intentions clear. This man is dangerous, possibly insane from his time underground. He needs to be found and dealt with." "You mean killed?" someone called from the back. Harper didn't flinch. "I mean dealt with. He knows things about our operations that could destroy us all. Every family in this room depends on this business. If Moss talks to the wrong people, if he brings federal agents into this valley, we're all finished." The logic was sound. Survival demanded unity. Whatever happened to Elijah Moss, it was clear he'd become an enemy of the entire community. Armed patrols were organized. Men went into the mountains in groups of 4 or more, searching for any sign of Elijah. They found nothing. He moved through the forest like smoke, leaving no tracks, no trace, no indication of where he was or where he might strike next. 2 weeks later, a supply run to Louisville was ambushed. 3 men, Harper's best drivers, were transporting a valuable shipment of aged whiskey when their truck was forced off the road by logs placed strategically around a blind curve. The men survived the crash, but woke to find themselves bound and gagged in the back of their own vehicle. The whiskey was gone, replaced by a note. "You took 5 days from me. I'll take everything from you. 1 piece at a time." The shipment represented 2 months of income. More importantly, it represented broken contracts, disappointed buyers, lost reputation. In the bootlegging business, reliability was currency. Harper's operation was beginning to look unreliable. Then the killings began. The first was Samuel Bishop, one of the 4 men who dumped Elijah in the cave. He was found in the woods, near his home, hanging from a tree branch by a rope around his neck. But he hadn't been hanged, not exactly. His feet touched the ground, would have taken his weight if he'd simply stood on his toes. Instead, he'd struggled, panicked, strangled himself slowly over what the coroner estimated was 3 to 4 hours. They found a note pinned to his chest, 5 days in the dark. "You get one." The second Bishop cousin was found a week later, drowned in 4 inches of water in a creek bed, his hands tied behind his back, positioned so that he'd had to choose between drowning or standing, but his broken ankles made standing impossible. The third and fourth Bishop cousins disappeared entirely. Search parties found signs of struggle, blood on leaves, drag marks leading into dense brush, but no bodies, not then. The town was in the grip of genuine terror now. Elijah Moss had become something more than a man. He was a ghost, a demon. The vengeful dead returned to collect debts. People barricaded their doors at night. Children were kept inside after dark. The men Harper sent into the mountains to hunt Elijah came back empty, handed and shaken, reporting strange sounds. In the forest, the feeling of being watched, glimpses of movement that vanished when they looked directly. Sarah Harper stopped eating. Confined to her room since Elijah's disappearance, she'd learned through whispered conversations with servants what her father had done. The knowledge that her love had been murdered, that her own father was responsible, had broken something essential in her. She sat by her window for hours, staring at the mountains, refusing to speak, wasting away like a flower denied sunlight. Her father, seeing his daughter's deterioration, felt something he hadn't experienced in years, doubt. Had he gone too far? Was Elijah Moss worth destroying his daughter's spirit? Was any amount of pride worth this price? But by then, it was far too late for doubt. In September of 1928, 6 months after Elijah had been thrown into the devil's throat, the Main Still complex was discovered by federal revenue agents. The raid was perfectly timed. Catching workers in the act of running a batch, the agents had information that was too detailed, too specific to be anything but insider knowledge. They knew exactly where to look, exactly when to strike, exactly which paths to take to avoid the usual warning system. 17 men were arrested, including Jacob Harper himself. The trial was held in the county seat, a 2-day affair that drew spectators from across eastern Kentucky. The evidence was overwhelming: the physical presence of the still, the testimony of agents, the clear violation of federal law. Harper's lawyer made a passionate argument about economic necessity, about the impossible situation Prohibition had created for mountain communities, about selective enforcement and government overreach. None of it mattered. Jacob Harper was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His assets were seized. The still equipment was destroyed. The cave complex was sealed with explosives, collapsing passages that had been used for generations. As Harper was led from the courtroom in chains, he looked up at the gallery and saw him, Elijah Moss, sitting in the back row, clean, shaven now, wearing new clothes, looking healthy and whole and very much alive. Their eyes met for just a moment, and in that moment, Harper understood. This wasn't about justice. This wasn't about the law. This was about debt. About suffering repaid with mathematical precision, about a man who'd spent 5 days in darkness and emerged with a very clear sense of balance. Elijah didn't smile, didn't nod, simply looked at Harper with those slate-gray eyes, then stood and walked out of the courtroom. That night, Harper's house burned to the ground. Sarah was at her aunt's house and survived. But the family, fortune, cash, deeds, records, everything Harper had accumulated over decades turned to ash. The bootlegging industry in Thornwood collapsed after Harper's arrest. Without its leader, without its infrastructure, without its reputation for reliable delivery, the operation simply ceased to exist. Families that had depended on whiskey money for generations were forced to find other ways to survive. Some moved away, some returned to coal mining, some simply scraped by on subsistence farming, watching their children grow thin and wondering how it had all fallen apart so quickly. Jacob Harper served 3 years of his sentence before dying in prison of pneumonia in 1931. He was 56 years old. At his funeral, attended by fewer than a dozen people, his daughter, Sarah, stood at the graveside with dry eyes, her face expressionless. She never married. The Bishop cousins who disappeared were found eventually, years later, when spelunkers exploring an unmapped section of the cave system discovered 2 skeletons positioned in a small chamber. They'd been left there with food and water, enough to survive for perhaps a week, with a note carved into the cave wall: 5 days was my sentence. 7 is yours. Choose your death, thirst or darkness. The medical examiner couldn't determine which they'd chosen. Both appeared to have died from dehydration, though whether that was faster than madness in absolute darkness was impossible to say. As for Elijah Moss, he disappeared from Harlan County immediately after Harper's sentencing and was never seen in those mountains again. Rumors placed him in various locations over the years. Some claimed he'd moved to California. Others insisted they'd seen him in New Orleans. Still others swore he'd died within months of his revenge, unable to live with what he'd become. The truth, as is often the case, was more mundane. Records indicate that a man named Elijah Moss purchased a small farm in Tennessee in 1929, married a widow with 2 children in 1930, and lived quietly until his death from heart failure in 1956, at the age of 56. He never spoke of his time in Kentucky. His wife later told relatives that he suffered from nightmares, that he sometimes woke screaming about darkness and cold, but that he seemed, in daylight at least, to be a kind and gentle man. Whether this man found peace is unknowable. Whether revenge brought him satisfaction or merely replaced one torment with another is a question without answer. But the cave system remains. The devil's throat, despite the government's attempts to seal it, proved too vast to completely close. New entrances were discovered over the years. Cave explorers have mapped hundreds of miles of passages, and they report strange things, carving on walls that shouldn't be there, chambers that smell of copper and charcoal decades after the stills were destroyed, sections where compasses spin uselessly and voices echo in ways that defy acoustic logic, and on certain nights, when the wind moves through the mountain just right, people in what remains of Thornwood, now barely 50 residents, most of them elderly, report hearing sounds from deep underground, not exactly voices, but not exactly not voices either. A sound like whispering or breathing or the slow drip of water onto stone. The Cherokee were right. Some places hold on to the past. Some darkness never fully lifts. Some debts, once paid, leave stains that won't wash clean. The story of Elijah Moss and the town of Thornwood remains a disturbing reminder that justice and vengeance, while often confused for one another, are fundamentally different creatures. Justice seeks balance, restoration, the healing of breach. Vengeance seeks only satisfaction. The evening of scores without regard for collateral damage. Elijah Moss was wronged, profoundly and terribly. What was done to him was attempted murder, a brutality that would have destroyed most men. That he survived was remarkable. That he chose to dedicate that survival to systematic destruction was perhaps inevitable, perhaps understandable, perhaps even justified by some moral calculus that weighs suffering against suffering. But in his pursuit of revenge, Moss destroyed more than Jacob Harper. He destroyed an entire community's livelihood, sent innocent families into poverty, caused deaths that had nothing to do with his original grievance. The men he killed in those caves experienced the same terror he'd experienced, measure for measure, darkness for darkness. Was that justice? Or was it merely the continuation of a cycle that could have been broken? But questions remain. How did Elijah survive those 5 days? Medical experts who have examined the case suggest that without water, without food, with serious injuries, the odds of survival were vanishingly small. Yet survive he did, emerging from those caves with a clarity of purpose that suggests something more than mere endurance. And what of the sounds reported from the devil's throat? Cave explorers are practical people, not given to superstition, yet their accounts are consistent. There is something in those chambers that feels wrong, that makes experienced spelunkers uncomfortable in ways they can't quite articulate. To this day, the cave system beneath Thornwood remains largely unexplored in its deepest sections. Modern technology has mapped the main passages, but there are branches, tributaries, vertical shafts that plunge into darkness too profound for even the best equipment to fully penetrate. Some local historians believe that the original indigenous peoples used these caves for purposes lost to time, that they performed rituals in those depths, that they understood something about the nature of darkness that modern science has forgotten. And on silent nights, when the wind carries moisture from underground streams and the mountains seem to lean closer to the valley, people still report seeing a figure on the high ridges, a lean man with gray eyes, standing motionless, watching the place where Thornwood used to matter, where his life was stolen and his revenge was taken, just watching, always watching, waiting, perhaps, for the debt to finally balance, for the scales to level, for the darkness to forgive what was done in its depths. If this journey through the brutal arithmetic of revenge resonated with you, if you find yourself pondering the line between justice and vengeance, between survival and transformation, between victim and monster, then consider subscribing to the Untold Hour. There are many more stories waiting to be told, mysteries buried in time that deserve to be examined, tales of human nature pushed to its absolute limits. Leave a like if this account provoked reflections that go beyond mere entertainment, and comment sharing your own perspectives on whether revenge can ever truly satisfy, whether some wrongs can ever be righted, whether the price of survival can be too high to pay. Until next time, remember that the darkest places are not always underground. Sometimes they're in the human heart, waiting for right circumstances to emerge into light, and some debts, once incurred, can never truly be paid.